But the more I think about geography in Africa, the more I come back to this question. So I'm using this question to frame the discussion that we have. Because we have to understand what African geography is, what it should be, and how it then contributes to knowledge about Africa in its different formats. Now, I went to some of the publications earlier on. This is 1845. Okay. None of us were alive by then, but it doesn't matter. And these are notes on African geography. And I wanted to understand how African geography was thought about in the past. It was more about traveling across Africa, talking to Africa, hearing the stories, listening to the stories, and then taking those stories back home. The Royal Geographical Society of London has been very key in shaping geography. And so it was important for geographers in the UK, and that's why the discipline is very strong in the UK, because it has a particular functions. It has to contribute to the building of the empire. And how do you do that? I can go on and list a number of examples of how geography was constituted and how we inherited, and how we have inherited that geography. Okay. So African geography, perhaps it's not so much African. Okay. What is African in African geography, if I may ask that question? Okay. If this was a class, that will be an exam question. Because it's quite important for us to understand what we're grappling with here. Now, when I read this article, I found it very interesting because it speaks about the stereotypes that have emerged out of interacting with African groups. Okay. This is something closer home. On your right, that's a journal published by UNAM. Okay. If the editors are here, they should not take issue with this. It's just an example. Now, one aspect of this is the blessing of bad geography in Africa. How can bad geography be a blessing? And I mean, the title itself is very catchy, but this is a more physical geography part of Africa. And the authors are very much interested in the topic which is really very emotional to most of us, slavery. And we know how this has just been a heated debate at the UN with a resolution on the 28th of March 2026 on declaring slavery as one of the main crime against humanity. But what is important about these physical studies of Africa, which is in physical geography, sometimes in environmental science, is that the landscape itself has shaped how people think about Africa. So what is bad geography in Africa? It's simply the landscape of Africa, which then means that, for these authors, these were the landscapes where the slaves could go and hide, the rugged terrains and so forth. And that's a benefit of bad geography. But to call it bad geography is also perhaps not the right description. Because then what is good geography? Okay. And then on the other side, I think your journal here, which I think is publishing some interesting part of the environment, it's focusing on the physical landscape. of both Angola and Namibia, and this is the article, but the journal doesn't necessarily focus on that. It has got environmental lens to it. Now, why am I referring to this? Physical geographies have been part of scholarship that has contributed to how we think about Africa. Whether Africa is dry, whether it's wet. But it is not that is not factual. The point is how we describe that, how we relate those conditions to Africans themselves, to societies themselves, becomes very important. Now, something that I think will be very helpful for us in thinking about the geography of Africa is the kind of approaches that we would need to think carefully about. One approach, of course, which is very common, I just gave this example, it's a geography of Egypt, the geography of South Africa, you can have the geography of Namibia. Now, I mean, the geography of Egypt, of course, was in this publication was 1906, and this geography of South Africa is more recent. And I could go on and list the geographies of Zululand, geographies of Lesotho, and so forth. Would this be a geography of Africa? That's how we should study Africa. Now, this is an important question methodologically. It made an impact on me when I was going to attend a conference and I met somebody overseas who asked me, where do I come from? And I say, from South Africa. And he concluded, I'm going to talk about South Africa. My presentation is about South Africa. We should remember that European geography was always targeting certain areas to go and find out the diamonds, the gold, and so forth. We have specialists sitting in Europe who understand Namibia perhaps more than us, ourselves. We have departments and institutions in the UK that understand Southern Africa more than ourselves, because that was their target. So the specialists that are in Europe about Africa, they've been studying certain areas, and you can't tell them anything about that area. They've studied it, their parents studied it, they traveled with them, and some of them claim to be Africans because they were in their mother's belly when they were traveling. So there is a sense that certain countries are owned intellectually by individuals. And that's why when we have to write about Zimbabwe, we must start from them. They know everything about Zimbabwe. Now, that's a troubling issue for African studies and geography. I mean, I looked at some of the presentations we have, and I'm as guilty as you are by always studying the country of our own, and we think this is Africa. I don't think that there's a way in which we can understand Africa by just studying the village in which we live, by just studying the cities in which we live. You know, if there is a PhD at UNAM who is studying about a topic in Ethiopia, that will be quite good. Okay. Why should we always be focusing on specific areas? And that, as I will explain later, has got some problems. It leads to epistemic boundaries. So we can't claim to know much of Africa because all we know is where we live, and not the whole of it. I mean, I know there are There are anthropologists whose work is Northeast Namibia, for example. People whose work is about Central Namibia. So they don't even know the whole of Namibia. Now, if we use this approach and we limit our knowledge to the boundaries of the countries, how then can we claim to know Africa? I mean, there's just no way we will be able to move beyond our own parochialisms in studying Africa. My main concern with that approach, and as I say, I'm as guilty as you are, is that we end up replicating Eurocentric specialisms. Somebody specializes on this country of their own, and we don't learn about what is happening just across the boundaries or the borders of the countries. If we use these methodologies or approaches in geography, I don't think there's a way we will understand Africa. How many of us have given examples from Egypt or from Sudan? Very rare, but that's part of Africa. And I'm not saying that empirical evidence from where we are is not important. That's not what I'm suggesting. That empirical evidence can be deepened, can be broadened by looking at what else has been done somewhere on the very same topic. So in the physical sciences at least, geographers are able to relate landscapes across borders. Those who study rivers, they do so. But in the social sciences, that is still a bit of a problem. We constrain our perspective on global Africa by approaching by approaching Africa from that angle. And more importantly, we cannot then argue for a place of Africa in the world, because all we'll be doing is understanding the cities in which we live. And of course, we can have a world cities approach to do so. I'm encouraging all of us to really think about this, because it's quite important on how we might become more of African geographers. We might do geography better if we move beyond these constraints. Okay. So I want to come to representations of Africa and then move to geographic concepts. There's a current debate, I'm sure you're aware of it, that the map of Africa is misrepresented. There's a campaign, #CorrectTheMap. And I think African geographers have been silent about that. We've been invited to say the maps that we're using are actually saying something that Africans don't want to be said, or they don't want to hear. But we haven't said anything about those maps. We haven't engaged with the debate. Perhaps we're still waiting for the debate to pause, and then we go back to it, and then write dissertations. But I think what is important about this campaign is the representation of Africa. Of course, we know how Africa has been misrepresented in terms of the key questions of poverty, for example. Every time poverty in Africa is represented, you won't even think you have got those kind of pictures somewhere in New York. So people who are sleeping on the floor, people who are homeless, we always think they are in Africa, but they're everywhere. The people queuing for soup in Chicago, at the heart of wealth. In Chicago, where all these innovations have happened to change the world, but they haven't been able to even help the poor. But the way we have absorbed these pictures, we always see Africa as a place of need, as a place of lack. And that itself makes us to feel, no, we come from this place of lack. So we are also lacking. And that's why most of the programs about capacity building are actually about Africans. I might be wrong. But if you look at capacity building programs around the world, the main target is Africans. So let's come back to this map. Looking at the map, the main complaint about the map is that it is cartographic. The main complaint about the map is that it is cartographic inequity. By representing Africa as smaller than the US, okay? You come from a small country, okay? It's not different from, I come from the big city, you come from the small village. And there's also a relationship there, a power relations that emerges from that. Okay. And so it is quite important to perhaps understand why the debate is so crucial. Because cartography itself is a very dangerous tool, because maps convey metaphorical and rhetorical meanings. Brian Harley, who did perhaps change the way we think about maps, made it very clear about how maps are tools for power. But we don't usually think about maps in that way. Some studies have shown that the map of China was almost like in the middle of the atlas, in the past. And that appears to be nonsense. But it means that you should not see China before you see these other countries. So how we use maps, and of course with GIS and many other technologies that we have now, we can use maps to even to tell lies. There's a title of the book that speaks to using maps to tell the lie. As for instance, they were colored, the color of the maps was red. And it was published in the magazine, Getaway magazine. I don't know, it's a popular magazine that encourages people, get away over the weekend and visit some other places. It was drawn in red. And I immediately thought, oh, that's the same color that Cecil John Rhodes used to draw the map from Cape to Cairo. It was drawn in red. And Rhodes' vision at the time was make this collection of countries British red from Cape to Cairo. When this message of the colonizing aspect of the environment was mentioned, they changed the color to green. It has remained green up to today. But what is important about these maps is that they don't show any village, they don't show any population. They are not population maps. All they show are the beautiful landscapes that European visitors must come and enjoy. Okay. At first I just thought, well, this is about conservation, but it is the power of maps, because when investors want to build lodges to help the tourist industry, for tourism purposes, then they can always imagine, if I build a lodge here, there's a valley where you will have animals roaming around, and somebody can sit down and have tea, coffee, watching other animals. But if you include people there, then the investors will say there might be trouble. What are those people going to do? Some of them might be thieves. Some of them might be, they start imagining the trouble. So what they do is to raise human populations in maps in order to present a landscape that is appealing to the tourist. I'm sure some of you are working on tourism here. You know how tourism works. You can list the place, places that people have to see before they die, and you sort of make them beautiful. And of course, you encourage the tourism industry to do that. But what has happened in those maps is the violence that we don't see. How people have been removed in order to create those spaces that are appealing. How people have been humiliated. And this is what we talk about in the violence of conservation, where people have been humiliated to actually leave the place. Humiliated in many forms. Some of them really I can't even say in a public platform. But serious humiliation, so that people should move out. And if they don't move out, you release the wildlife to these areas, so that you create conflict. And you say, well, people are in the spaces of wildlife, and that's why there's conflict. To resolve this conflict, they need to move out. Now, I don't use, and I've never used, the concept wildlife conflict, because I've got an issue with it, but that's just me. It has a connotation that people are encroaching wildlife areas, and that's why there's a problem, not the other way around. So that's why I start with wildlife, human-wildlife conflict. It's never wildlife-human conflict, something like that. It just, and I'm not saying that's not a good topic to research for those students who are working on this, but I just have a problem with it, because ideologically it is rooted in the view that humans are taking the areas where wildlife should be, the areas of wildlife for this. Now, coming back to maps, and I just find this terminology of maps as territories perhaps very useful to make us think about them. That they are intellectual constructions, as we know, but they're very useful in manipulating space, and this is what I've just explained now. But let's come to what this means for African geography, or the study of Africa. They simply mean that the maps create foundational views on Africa as a continent, but also Africans. And Alimas Rui and W.E.B. Du Bois wrote extensively on this. And Du Bois' work was more about Africa in the world. And Al-Mazrui had the same sort of ideas. And these are not geographies, which invites geographers to read more broadly about African thoughts, what other African scholars are thinking about the continent, about the people on the continent. So why are we worried when we're told that the African map is small and we should redraw it? It's because it represents power relations. It represents a sense of some areas that are being powerful and others that perhaps do not have much power. Now, what happens when we teach learners, students about these maps without taking into considerations that maps themselves tell a story about power? Somebody has just published a book recently on the myths of geography, talking about how the representations of the world is based on some of the myths. Initially, actually, there were 3 continents only, and Africa has always been part of this continent. Okay, so I don't want to go to to details about the to details about the evolution of maps, but just to make a point, that maps themselves, if African scholars have to think about Africa, we have to think about how it is represented in maps, in narratives, in stories, and in other ways. So I think that will be quite useful for us to do. We've naturalized some of these concepts. Okay. It is natural now to describe Africa as Africa south of the Sahara, or sub-Saharan Africa. Now, that description. So, Africa's south of the Sahara is a colonial division of Africa itself. And if it is in the textbook, I think we should remove it. It should just be Africa. And if you've written a thesis already with material on Africa south of the Sahara, that's fine. But after the thesis, you can go back and say, how do we decolonize Africa south of the Sahara to redeem yourself? Because I think that it's natural for us simply to say that this is how we describe Africa. But we are dividing Africa ourselves. And that's what colonialism does. That's why colonialism doesn't stop, because we have become agents of colonialism. I don't have a better description to that. We're actually sustaining colonialism by using the concepts that are colonial. Now, even if you go to data sets by UNESCO, United Nations entities, and so forth, there's data on Africa, on sub-Saharan Africa. You find it quite easily, but you can't relate that data to North Africa because you're not supposed to. Now, but North Africa itself is also divided. North Africa is seen as part of the Middle East, what they call the MENA region. And you can see how people are writing about the MENA region as a natural region, okay? A tourism geography of the MENA region. Now, we are just helping that division to be sustained. We're sustaining the division of the continent. How can we then address African problems and African issues when we have these divisions that we have naturalized? I'm just giving you examples. I mean, these are recent publications, 2020, 2021. I'm sure if you Google, you will find more in 2026. It has just become natural. Now, why should we worry about this kind of divisions if we are to have a truly African geography? It's because the way Africa has been divided into regions make it impossible for us to think about Africa as a whole. Make it difficult for us to think about what we mean by Africa. Okay. Now, this is just a division which is within Africa, the African continent itself. What about people who are not necessarily on the continent, who are of African region, African origin rather? I'll come back to that in a minute. So there are many concepts. The task of African geographers will be to find out those concepts that should be removed from the textbooks, that we should not use when we write. And that, I mean, if we can't do anything, at least we can deal with those concepts. I mean, when you read about decolonizing geography, you don't find those kinds of discussions, because the decolonizing rhetoric and narrative itself is dominated by the North. Actually, much of the discussion about decolonizing geography are not in Africa itself. Okay? So what will decolonizing geography in Africa mean? One of the tasks will be these concepts that we don't necessarily need, because they help sustain, the political ideology of a divided Africa. But I want to move to something that I said I'm busy thinking about now, and I'll pause here before I answer to get a sense of whether I should stop this exercise. One is thinking about Africa as space. And space is very critical in geographic studies at the global level. Space matters. Okay. Space is important. Okay. And psychologists will tell us that space can shape our behavior, can shape the way we see ourselves. And that's why those who design prisons have to make sure that people's psychology will be impacted by the design of the place. There's a few who have seen Robben Islands, where people like Nelson Mandela were incarcerated. We'll have a sense of this small space where you need to be confined to that space so that it impacts on your mind, it impacts on your behavior, on how you feel about yourself. And I'm just giving this example because that's a space I've seen. And so Swapo lived in different spaces, and those spaces were very difficult for them. It was to change them. Okay. Now, what does space mean for us? I know it is a key concept in geography. And I gave an example of a space without people, where it's just empty landscapes, beautiful landscapes, in order to promote tourism, and that's important. But what does space do, and why should we worry about or be concerned about space and the way we should think about space? Now, this conference, the emphasis is on Africa's responses. Okay. Africa's responses to challenges. The VC also emphasized this, the minister's speech also emphasized this. We have to respond. Okay. But if we were to pause and say, are we thinking about Africa as a space there or Africa as a place? Then we go into deeper conversations. Because Africa as a space is bigger than Africa as a continent. Okay. Africa as a space is bigger than the continent in the sense that it is the spaces on which Africans live. Not all Africans are on the continent. I'm sure that's given. We have put people in the diaspora, which the African Union finally recognized as the sixth region of the African Union. Because they want to incorporate those Africans who are not on the continent, who could contribute to solving the problems, who could contribute to responding to the challenges that we face as Africans. I'm told that in South America, in Brazil, perhaps there are more Africans than we think there are. So if we are talking about global Africa, we really cannot do that by looking at Africa as a space. Sorry, by looking at Africa as a continent. So the space on which people of African descent live is something that has now informed this resolution of slavery. Now, when you look at the resolution, it says Africans and people of African descent. Okay. Now, collectively, you need to use space to expand what Africa is. So Africa as a continent was itself designed, named such by people who wanted to have control over the resources, people who want to control the inhabitants, and they will say, well, this is an area. But if we think about Africa as a space, we go beyond that. So how do we resolve African problems or African challenges? Is it just people who are on the continent, or is it all of Africa? Is it a global Africa that we're calling? And how do we interact with global Africa? I think this is the beginning for the team that's organizing this conference, to bring African minds together. And by African here, I'm not necessarily referring to black people. And, that's another conversation. To bring African minds together. There are people who are born and bred on this continent. They have got a duty and responsibility to be engaged and to solve the problems, because they are here. Now, if we think about Africa as a space, here I'm just giving 3 examples here. One is the elasticity of space. Okay. Space is elastic. In other words, you cannot delineate space with certainty, in the sense that it changes. And I'll give an example of those who are working in the environmental sciences. Would know that even when you have got a protected area and say we're protecting wildlife here, you realize this space is not enough. The clearest examples are the elephants. Okay. What has happened in countries like Botswana is that there are more elephants than they can be accommodated. And that's why now there are elephant corridors to get them to move to Zambia, to other places, to make the space elastic. Human beings also cannot be confined to spaces, because they've got to go to study somewhere else, they've got to go and work somewhere else. So there's always movement, and I've got colleagues here who specializes on mobilities and migration. So I'm sure we'll hear more about that. So if we think of Africa as a space, then we allow that elasticity. Now, that elastic aspect of space would also be useful for our intellectual pollination. I think what we suffering from on the continent, I don't want to call it indigenization, but that's the way that people use, that institutions are being indigenized. Okay? If you come from a particular country, you must work from that country. I had interesting discussions with colleagues in the University of Dar es Salaam, which really was a hallmark of African intellectual and thinking and action. But it has become very difficult for anybody else to work there, Tanzania. What it does, it reduces the elasticity of space. You look at the top universities in the world, they have taken talent from anywhere around the world. Actually, some places you don't apply, you get invited to apply. Because they want the intellectual input. Yeah, I could have said this if the VC was right. But we should also be thinking about Africa as a space for thought. Epistemologies. So, and this comes back to geography. What would African geography look like? So that when the students and the learners go to class, they should be able to learn about this kind of geography from a different perspective. we're all concerned, rightly so, about climate change. But how did Africans understand climate? And how did they survive some of these dramatic climate changes in the past? So we can redeem African knowledge by saying there have been a lot of thinking about the environment in Africa. There have been a lot of thinking about the relationship between the environment and people in Africa. And as such, we need to recover that knowledge, African epistemologies. So that will be the task of African geography. Thinking of Africa as a space would also mean that we should understand how Africans themselves have produced space. In some cases where Africans have been relocated, for example, we cannot say that they've produced that space because they've been forced to live in those spaces. But it is important to think about the continent in terms of how it has been produced as a space, okay? So that we can grapple with some of the problems that are rooted in the production of that space. Now, if for example, we think of sustainability, how did people use what we call sustainability today without calling it sustainability? Because sustainability is not something that is defined in the books. It is how people have survived, how they thought about being sustainable in the way that they live. Okay, so I'll come to the last point of Africa as an area with its physical limits. And this is where I get a bit anxious when we talk about Africa. It's a geographic phenomenon. We could be emphasizing more of these physical limits. Going back to maps, how many maps of Africa do not include all the islands that belong to Africa? Actually, some of these islands are more important for Africa's solutions to the problem. The other day there was a meeting in Mauritius, so I had it in my passport, and I needed to fill the form. It was before this e-form that they have now. And one of the questions was, in Mauritius, have you been to Africa? Okay, I was just confused. I thought this is part of Africa. Now you can see how, I don't want to rub salt to the wound of those who struggled with immigration yesterday, but it's just the way we think about it, and then it affects how we relate to human beings. I could understand why they use the term alien in the US. If you visit the US, you describe as an alien. I can understand that, okay? But not in Mauritius. And I think it's because of the area. So if we think of Africa as an area, and the islands see themselves as something different because they were meant to do so. I mean, the British made sure that Mauritius is a British. Reunion, even today, is still a French territory. Okay? You go to Reunion, you must get a French passport. But it should be part of Africa. Okay? But that has been taken. Again, to come back to the question of geopolitics, it has been taken so that Mauritius in particular, so that you can have the military in the ocean to deal with the Indian Ocean, to be in control of the Indian Ocean. And I think that's where the Chagos Islands that have been in the media are a critical aspect of that. So if we think of Africa as an area, then you find all these demarcations, all these parcels of Africa. Now, what is our task there? Is to reclaim Africa intellectually, what Africa is, because that will improve our relations. It will improve our relations when we are in South Africa, when we are in Namibia, when we are in Zimbabwe. It will improve our relations. But thinking of an area, so the countries themselves are, I know there's sovereignty that is to be exercised, but the physical limits of the continent has become very difficult. So that's why we can't even solve the problems, because we are the problem ourselves in the first instance. You know, we cannot have a unified West. Now we have to view the inhabitants from outside. You know, Africans are viewed from outside. There are always this aspect that, you know, you don't come from here, you don't belong here. And that for me is it's a problem of geography. Having grown under apartheid, which was a geographic project par excellence, I know what space does. It socializes people to feel that they belong here. And of course, that program of apartheid continued in Namibia, okay? When Namibia was under South Africa's occupation. Okay? And so you have that sense of people being socialized into space, that the space is theirs. And what apartheid did actually was even to distribute resources to those spaces, so that if you belong here, you work here, your resources are here. When you go to other places, other provinces, even today, there's always a sense that you actually don't belong here. Okay. If I could give more examples about how this plays out in South Africa, I would need another hour. But it's important to understand that as geographers, we should move away from Africa as an area. If we continue to do that, there's just no way we can respond to these global problems, because the domestic ones will overwhelm us. What is increasingly becoming important, I mean, historically, Africa as an area has been a dumping site. All this toxic waste from Europe, North America, you know, they're dumped in Africa. Now, of late, all unwanted bodies are being dumped in Africa. You know, you have got the people that the US doesn't want, they must go to Kigali. They must go to Uganda. And this is what is confirming Africa as a dumping site. Why would you have only one continent where you can dump the people you don't want? I mean, they've got their own prisons, they've got their own spaces, but now, you go there to Africa. You can see how we are recycling the very same idea of Africa as a dumping site. But of course, it has always been a thief's paradise. You know, if you want to steal something, you just go to Africa, you'll get it. I mean, if you were to read the work of the organization called Traffic, you will be amazed how people have been stealing lizards from Africa, butterflies. So if you were to collect something, I mean, in the past, the scientists, botanists, had to have a cabinet. They must go to Africa and collect. So most of the specimens in the biological sciences have been collected from this continent. And they've not been named. They've not been named according to the Africans who helped in the collections. A colleague of mine in biological sciences said only 1% of the specimens that come from Africa actually recognized as such. Now, if we're thinking of stealing from Africa now in the age of critical minerals, I mean, we are in serious danger. All the critical minerals are here. Behind the DRC, if these motor vehicles that people are talking about, sustainability issues, it means that the looting must come back. And of course, countries are signing deals to say, yeah, you can have our critical minerals. Okay. It is a place where you can steal what you want for your own industrialization. First, they stole able-bodied people to go and work as slaves, build Europe, build the US, and that looting hasn't stopped. It's because of how Africa is being seen. So before we even respond to some of these global challenges, we must have the basis on which we reclaim Africa. And my proposal is that we should move away from Africa as an area to Africa as a place, because then we have more people of African descent in the Caribbean and everywhere else who need to be part of this. And actually the Caribbean Association has been very instrumental in getting us to a resolution on slavery. So people who are already working with us there. So maybe next time when we meet, there will be geographers from that part of the world or other parts of the world. In the 4 minutes that is remaining, I really want to encourage all of us to think of African geography not from the textbook that we've been reading, but to step back and say, how can we reclaim Africa for knowledge? How can we reclaim Africa for teaching? How can we reclaim Africa for researching? And I want to emphasize that there's just no way we can understand Africa better if each of us is studying their own countries. And I'm not saying it is wrong to do so, because we have to contribute to national development plans, as the Vice Chancellor and the ministers have said. We should do so. Universities are institutions that are using taxpayers' money. We should give back to those taxpayers. But in doing so, we should not find ourselves trapped in those epistemic boundaries that we think the only research we can do is about my country of origin. What has saved me at last was these transboundary conservation areas. I'm not an environmental scientist by training, but I found them very useful in thinking about space. So I've read a lot about what's going on in Namibia, the TFCA that Namibia is involved, transfrontier conservation. I've read a lot about Botswana, and I've done field work in these areas. And that began to help me understand even SADC better. Okay. So what is helping me, which I hope it will help you as well, is to have research questions that can be addressed by just looking at your own country. Is to have research questions that will force you to say what is happening in Kenya. So I ended up doing field work in Tanzania and understanding what is the relevance of the conditions in Tanzania to what I'm researching in South Africa, and so forth. You may think, oh, I don't have money to do all these things. But there are books there to read, okay, to understand the histories of these areas. So colleagues, I'm hoping that in sharing with you some of my own anxieties, my own weaknesses as a young researcher, I don't think that we should all go to the same traps. It is an opportunity for us now to say, we reclaim African geography and what will it look like. And this commission should think about the agenda for what African geography should be, and work on that theme, so that we can also help reduce the dependency that we currently have. Colleagues, I thank you very much. It's an honor for me to talk to you, and I appreciate your audience. Thank you.
Thank you, Prof. Maano. Indeed, it was a beautiful presentation. I went through different emotions, feeling guilty, and then towards the end, when you said you are also guilty yourself, then I'm like, okay, today I'm getting educated. Thank you so much, Prof. Before I proceed, I would want to give an opportunity to anyone to engage, just two people. Whether you want to react to the presentation, whether you have a question for Prof. Yeah. Yes, thank you.
Thank you. Good day. My name is Tias Kumar from the University of Johannesburg. And Prof. Maano, you hit it on the nail, especially with the scarce materials. My research area is e-waste. You attend the World Resource Forum, diluting Africa again. And then they show a video, for example, on cobalt mining in the DRC, and everyone is shocked. And I'm sitting there thinking, but don't you know where your cobalt and lithium for your devices are coming from? So yeah, we really need to start protecting. We are exporting all our waste again. They are recovering the gold, the palladiums and so on. And then again, we are losing our valuable resources. So yeah, you speak a very good truth today.
Anyone else? Any human geographer who want to respond or react?
Thank you, Prof. Maano. Yes, we just saw each other at UCT last year. So I want to comment on that issue of the decolonizing geography, because I think it's a very difficult thing. And I think we don't understand how difficult it is, because even the space we exist in is permeated with coloniality. So without even realizing, when you continue to perpetuate these things, when you're doing research and you're looking at certain concepts, for example, issues of Ubuntu, it has been, I like to say, it's become more of, it's a perverse in a way, because it's not having the aspects of Isintu, which is the basis of Ubuntu from the African perspective. Now it's becoming a thing of Umuntu, Ngabantu, we are through each other, where it deals with indigenous knowledge, society, culture, traditions, all things that are innate to us as Africans. So all of these things, when we're doing geography especially, we need to keep them in mind. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Dr. Hamingelo.
Thank you very much. Prof, thank you very much. You made me think about something that you mentioned about continents, countries, and I'm asking why generally no one is fighting to create a new continent, but at the meantime there are people fighting to create new countries. Why is it that the case?
Thank you. Allow me to combine two items, which is inviting some entertainment and also the announcement item. But before I do that, the Namibian is a giving nation. We love giving gifts. So we would love to give a gift to Prof. Maano. From the land of the brave. Okay, before I invite the entertainment, Namibia is it's one of those countries. We were talking about place and space and all that. Compared to most countries, it's big in space. However, the population is small. But the diversity in that population, most ethnic groups, we can't communicate to each other without having an official language, which is English. So it's quite a diverse country, and we just want to show you some of our diversity through the entertainment that will proceed. They are ready for us, but the announcements, I just want to announce that there are small rooms available if you want to have small meeting or bilateral meetings. There are small rooms available. If you want to make use of one, please see us or any one of our organizers to arrange one for you. And also, I just want to say, if we want to use bathrooms, on my left, just if you turn behind this wall, there are signs indicating where the bathrooms are. And they have prepared tea for us. However, lunch is slotted for 12 o'clock. Is that still the case? For 12 o'clock, so that we can proceed with our sessions, parallel session from 1 o'clock. And after the entertainment, I would love to invite everyone for a group picture, because I know on day one we look our best. I don't like it. I don't like it when people make us take pictures on the last day when you are so relaxed and you don't really look your best, you know. Let's do the group photo today after this session, so that we'll come out nice in the pictures. Thank you very much. I would like to invite, let me just get the name. Yeah. Sandoka Cultural Group. Nahas, can you please bring them in? Thank you. And what is interesting is that they have fused all the cultural performances from all over Namibia. They are really fused, and that's quite interesting. Resonate with our professor's keynote speech, that we need to look at Africa as Africa. So this was quite a Namibian performance. You can't really say it's northwest or northeast or south. It was quite a Namibian performance. So thank you very much for your resilience and patience to stay this long in this session. I would like to say this session has official close, and I would just want to transition a little bit into our next sessions, that we're gonna have parallel sessions. One of the sessions will be here. I think that's the one under Margaret Ambula. And then the other session, I think you will follow Prof. Martin Hipondoka. If you can just stand up so that people can see those. Yeah, that is Prof. Martin Hipondoka. For those who are following the parallel session that he's going to facilitate, please just look for him after lunch. We do have open source, open free Wi-Fi, NIPAM guest something. So it doesn't have a password if you want to use the Wi-Fi. Thank you.
Yeah, colleague who had trouble at the airport. I hope you have seen my email. I sent it a bit late, but if you came with your passport, please entrust it with me. Yeah, thank you.
All right, thank you. Let's go for lunch. The group photo, yes. The group photo, please. Where is the photographer to guide us, please? Mr. Nkono?
Where is the photo?
It should be outside, yeah. And find a spot while the photographer is finding his way.
majesty or